All right. Hi, everyone. I welcome you to this installment of Table Talk, a series of conversations with academics and writers who work on human-animal relations. And we are the Indian Animal Studies Collective. I'm Susan Haris, and my co-host Anu Pande is also there. The Indian Animal Studies Collective aims to bring together academics and writers who are working on animals in India. Today we have with us Dr. Ambika Aiyadurai from IIT Gandhinagar, and we are going to discuss her recent book with her called Tigers Are Our Brothers, Anthropology of Wildlife Conservation in Northeast India. Thanks a lot, Dr. Ambika, for accepting our invitation. And I think you can turn off the live transcription if you want. And just a few more things about the talk. It's more of a discussion, and at any point you can raise a hand or type a question in the chat box. It's just for an hour, so please feel free to ask anything at any point during this conversation. So I thought we could begin the conversation because of the way you've starting with the way you've positioned yourself in the book. I felt that you mentioned that you bring together insights with your background as a wildlife biologist and an anthropologist. And I wanted to hear more about that, about what insights you brought together from those different fields, because I'm sure both of them have very different methods.
So thank you so much, Susan, and thank you so much, Anu, for inviting me. Happy to be here. And I think maybe 15 years back, if you had asked me whether I would have written stories about human-animal relations from an anthropological perspective, that was nowhere in the picture, because my initial training to understand animals is through a formal scientific way of understanding animals as study animals. I also did my zoology, where I used to dissect rats and other animals and observing. So for me, animals are more starting with animals as more study animals, looking at their reproductive system, brain, and all that. But then my interest in wildlife conservation started in my third year of undergraduation in zoology, and I chose a paper on wildlife conservation. And by then I had started to watch birds, and as a hobby. And my full-fledged training in wildlife biology, wildlife sciences was in Wildlife Institute of India, which is this Government of India's institution where people are trained to become wildlife biologists, and forest officers come and get trained in wildlife management. And those 2 years of training was very, very rigorous. And I ended up doing my MSc Wildlife Science thesis on Asiatic jackals, following them and trying to understand what they're eating, where do they live, and what is their location. And till then, actually, my training was in sciences of zoology, botany, chemistry, and once I finished my master's, my first visit to Arunachal, I think, changed a little bit about how. So this visit, I started to question my own training in wildlife sciences, because I was at that point of time, the assignment that I had was in Itanagar Wildlife Sanctuary, where there was a serious issue of human wildlife conflict. So when I went there, so there was, so I could see and hear animal skulls and skins, because it's part of the tribal social world. So when I went to the field, that I was trying to understand, I was able to see a different perspective to human-animal relations. Human-animal relations, not from an urban perspective of animals as pets or animals as fast food or animals as study animals. There it was very different, because in Northeast India, especially in Arunachal, what I witnessed was when I was walking in the forest to understand what animals were present, which mammals were present. I saw plenty of traps. Traps for animals, traps for birds on the canopy. And what was interesting is that people are telling me a lot of stories about these animals. And I thought people who hunt animals would do it secretly, and it's because it's against wildlife law. But in Arunachal at that point of time, and even now, the pride of the landscape, pride of being next to animals, and the knowledge of the landscape and stories were it's still very rich. And so for me, that side of looking at animals as as companion animals or animals that you keep at home for sacrificial purposes. For me, I was questioning why this side of human animal relations was not taught to me in my wildlife sciences training, because we were trained as biologists, and we were trained to count animals, map animals movement, and GIS mapping. So we had all the technical knowledge about understanding. So the formal training given to us to understand the landscape through the lens of technology, through the lens of ecological sciences, was very different from how the stories that people are giving me. And that was also equally very rich lived experience of looking at both having animals in their homes, and also hunting animals in the forest, consuming animals, trading animals. And many of these aspects are unlawful because we have a Wildlife Protection Act. So that side of human-animal relations was also very important for me, the legal perspective of it. So once I started probing further, I realized that human-animal relations is not, there are multiple ways of looking at it. And as a science student, and then later, my interest in Arunachal began. I ended up doing a survey on indigenous hunting practices. And what I did was I interviewed people who are hunting these animals, because I went to Arunachal to understand hunting as an ecological problem, hunting as a reason for decrease in reason for extinction of animals, hunting as a problem. But when I started to interview, the stories about hunting was more than that. It was not just one way of looking at it through legal perspective or ecological perspective. But the other reasons why people were hunted was for consumption, for protein intake, because these were very remote villages, lack of markets, and also for trade. Some animals were hunted because they had very important, the body parts had very high market value. But the most important perspective was they continue to talk about animals and landscape through a cosmological angle. And as a science person, I was writing it down. I was spending a lot of time with people, but I didn't know how to make sense of all this. And that information is not, that will be seen as unscientific, discarded as people's stories, discarded as some ad hoc observation. But what they were saying was very interesting. So my training and then my shift to anthropology after that, I did my second master's in anthropology, environment and development. That was helpful. So for my PhD, when I said I'm using both the lenses, it was helpful because during my PhD, I had chance to attend meetings where there were members of WWF, conservation NGOs. There were members from the local community. There was forest department sitting there, and there were researchers sitting there. So this cross-cultural communication that was happening was very interesting, because some aspects are overlapping, but that there was a lot of interesting conflicts. So as a person so I was able to see multiple stories emerging in these formal meetings. One example is this, which I think I start my book with that. So there was this meeting between local residents of Dibang Valley, the Idu Mishmis, and there were a small team from WWF Delhi. They had come to map the Dibang Valley has this very huge wildlife sanctuary. So the entire book and the stories I've written is from in and around the sanctuary, from the Dibang Valley district, and all the information is actually collected through interviews with Idu Mishmi community, and also scientists who are visiting there, forest department, and other what I call the interest groups in conservation. So my book is a commentary on modern wildlife conservation, what the state intends to do, and how that intention may not be welcomed by local communities, and the frictions and the discussions around it. So that so when I say I was able to because I have dual degree in two different disciplines, this becomes very helpful when we are this example that I was in a meeting, and there was a Zilla Parishad member, the district council member, Atuko was sitting, and then there was a group of scientists from WWF. So for the first question was this was in Hindi, and Atuko asked, "Aapka yahan aane ka maqsad kya hai? What is the purpose of your visit?" And the person from WWF said that we have come to see your jungle, and you're talking about a remote district in Arunachal Pradesh, and WWF members had come from Delhi. So Atuko's reply was, "आप तो दिल्ली इतना दूर दिल्ली जंगल देखने के लिए आए थे क्या? So have you come from all the way from Delhi to see our jungle?" So the first interaction is that why I'm telling this is because often when people like us, all of us who are not from Arunachal or from urban places, when we go there, the assumption is that not having a very frank discussion about that. For example, I think the reluctance was assuming that people are very simple. I think again we stereotype local communities, and those stereotypes doesn't work in Northeast. All the stereotypes about gender, tribal communities, statehood, and pick up any sociological theme, development. So stereotypes are not going to work. So I think the response was, and then.
I have a question about what you say, about anthropology, and there's such an emphasis on the place of narrative and story in any kind of talking about human-animal relations in contemporary theory. And I wanted to know what you think about that, because as you said, what you get from the Mishmi is different stories, different accounts. So do these different stories, how exactly do they challenge the conservation perspective? Do they reframe the problem, or do they provide missing information? Or is it that the conservation perspective is so rooted in colonial history that they can't access the world of the local people who are living there?
No, very, very important, very interesting question, because in wildlife conservation, narrative itself, now it is changing. When we were taught about wildlife biology and conservation, so as a zoology student, we used to have this Kothari series where it starts from protozoa to protozoa, multicellular organisms and insects and birds and mammals, and it stops at mammals. There are no humans there. So I think our training is that the natural world is a non-human world. People only come in as maybe villains extracting the natural resources, or humans come as saviors, saving the world. And then wildlife sciences, the master's course, now again one of the current project is to make this syllabus more inclusive, more inclusive of social sciences and philosophy and other things. So even in my master's, there were hardly any training in social sciences. So the number one highlight for wildlife conservation training is that there is lack of social sciences perspective, and that notion is so rooted in wildlife science training and also policy making, and also this some policies which are when they are implemented on the ground. The understanding is that people should be removed out from the natural landscape, because people are seen as problem makers and as destroyers. And often these people, when we say humans, the notion is that these are tribal people who are destroying the forest. Next to that, there is a dam coming up. Next to that, there is a road coming up. But immediately the blame is on the poor local or indigenous tribal communities. So when we say so, having non-human spaces for effective conservation seems to be one of the very, as you said, it's very much rooted in even now actually, whether you study forestry, whether you study zoology, etc., etc. So that is number one point. Anu, you want to ask something here?
Not exactly a question, just what you were saying made me think about this thing in your book, which I found really beautiful. It's like it's like the turning point, so to speak. You know, the moment where you're out with a young man, and he wants to hunt a raptor, and you stop him, and then you see how afterwards you were plagued by guilt and a sense of unease at what you've done, and this guilt stays with you for years. And I think then we see what you were just talking about, you know, the human either as savior and you as a wildlife conservationist by training, put yourself obviously self-identified with that role. And then this young man becomes then the looter human who's about to kill an animal wild. And
But what is
here your moment of unease starting, no? This that it's not that black and white.
See, yeah, thank you for bringing it up. I think when I look back, so see, the thing is, in my own family, we slaughter goat, chicken sacrifice in my father's village, and all. I don't know. I'm a non-vegetarian, but I think my training in a scientific institution, and then and the friction is that the friction is science is telling us something about nature and natural world, which again is seen as a dying nature. If we don't protect them, they're all going to go. Or so I think this 2 years training and my colleagues and the ecosystem of that institute. So when I look back, maybe I was, as you said, I was there as a person with a wildlife biology degree, trying to go and understand human wildlife conflict, and also this feeling that I know because I've studied science, people should not be shooting any bird because it's a protected area. So I think this model of protected area has been challenged a lot. I think now people are rethinking how this protected area model, a protected area, whether it is national park or wildlife sanctuary, should be there should be some other way of protection. This is not the way to protect. So from there, we have come a long way to community-based conservation. Idea is that there are people who are living there. So people who were completely invisible earlier, and now conservationists are seeking their knowledge to help in conservation. So that incident was, I thought that, I don't know, I shouldn't have stopped him from shooting that bird. And in other places, maybe people, for example, in Central Indian tribal communities or Gujarat, where the pride of being a tribal is, so that the policies would have worked very well. So people would not dare to take a gun and walk with a biologist when they're going into the forest. But here, my assistant, who is from a neighboring village, he had a gun with him. And so I think it's also about the state-people relations. In Northeast is very, very different because they challenge authority very easily when it comes to Northeast. And that challenge is what Susan was talking about. I could see that when there is a wildlife biologist or a forest department officer who was there, people are, instead of, so they ask a lot of questions. It's good actually, I'm not saying that. No, so this is something for many people like us, it's very new. Like for example, if there is a policy, we expect that people should follow, but I think the resistance is higher there. So these discussions become very interesting for me. So so in one incident, the Zilla Parishad member was actually not challenging, but in a very witty, humorous way. And when he asked the WWF person, why are you here? And he said, we have come to see the jungle. And the Zilla Parishad member replies that, you have not come all the way from Delhi to see this jungle, don't you? And then there was a slight discussion. So this immediate response, and then assumption that tribals are very innocent. I think that is another stereotype we have in our head, that you can go there and convince people to make way for conservation. It's not going to happen in many places. In some places, maybe people will say yes, but in Northeast, it's not the case. And there were discussions about how wildlife is so important. So there is this WWF person, officer was actually telling people how important these forests are and how important these tigers are. And one example which I've written in this book is the scientist is explaining to the villager with the to the local residents that, if you continue to hunt deer, if you continue to hunt deer species, the grass would grow, and then the ecosystem balance will get disturbed. To that, Zilla Parishad member says that, I think I'm messing it up. So the Zilla Parishad replied saying that, the deer species will not increase because we are there to hunt them. So we will keep the ecosystem balance. And they said we will keep the ecosystem balance by hunting the deer species so that the balance is maintained. So you don't have to worry about that. So this was very interesting. One information is from this textbook notion of food chain, that there are these grasses are eaten by herbivores are eaten by carnivores. So if one of them increases, then there will be imbalance. But here the local residents are saying that you don't have to worry about it. If the deer species increases, we can hunt them, and we can keep that in balance. So all this interesting information, I think sometimes I find these discussions very interesting, and I feel that because I don't know, because of my dual training, or maybe anthropology makes you more, you're just sitting and listening to someone, observing them, body language and what words are being used. So all this is a very interesting, many examples. So this is one example where I thought that what conservation is going through is this meeting of these multiple worlds. In few decades back, maybe setting up a sanctuary, asking people not to venture into the forest for grazing and all was maybe easier, but now there is resistance from everywhere, especially in Northeast. I don't know, other places I don't know, but in Northeast and other places also, any development projects coming up, people are asking questions. So I think conservation is going through that phase where we have to be very careful about how we engage with the local communities.
I want to know a bit more about what you said about authority and expertise, because, like in Kerala, for example, with any kind of marginalized community like Adivasis, what is not given to them is exactly authority or any kind of expertise. It's always the outsiders coming in and telling them what is good. But at the same time, I was also thinking about, like a novel like Things Fall Apart, where there is a separate ethnic community, but then the members of that community are being trained by missionaries, and they also kind of agree with what the white people are telling them. So then, there's the insiders from the marginalized community who agree with the outsiders. But with the Mishmi people, how was it that authority and expertise was it available just to you because you were actively listening, or is it that the conservationists just ignore what is being said through these witty remarks and these quick retorts?
No, thank you. I think the first reaction from biologists and researchers is a sense of shock, because they actually talk about I think the assumption that we have is people who are very remotely placed, they are not aware of the current scenario, what's happening in Delhi. So people actually will talk about DMK politics sitting in the India-China border when they came to know that I'm a Tamilian. Then I said, no, I'm a Tamilian, but I live in Gujarat. Then they will start talking about BJP politics. And they'll say, oh, you're from Modi ji ka basti se aaya hai. So at that point of time, 2014, this is before Modi became Prime Minister. So I think the assumption is that just because we don't know much about Northeast India, people there also don't know much about rest of the country. So when the local residents, Mishmi communities are asking questions, challenging, and the two examples that came during that interaction was the discussion also went beyond tigers and ecosystem to wildlife sanctuary. So when I started my work, people were asking me to find out information about when did who approved this wildlife sanctuary. So can you go and get notification? Because they were saying that many of us didn't know that there was this huge wildlife sanctuary there, because there is typically at that point of time, this place was more like a paper park. with no boards and very few staff to handle and all that. So often the discussions were that it was declared without our consent. And when I started to do this research, the expectation also that I will write about it and bring some justice to them. That was, as a researcher, that was also very, I find it very burdening also, and also heartening. But I think that is the dilemma of the researcher working on with communities. So so when every time there is a discussion about forest or animals, they will question how this wildlife sanctuary, with whose permission the wildlife sanctuary was set up. So anybody coming from in the name of wildlife conservation, the participation by the community residents is they're very, very reluctant because of the past, because of the history of the landscape. The fear is that the government will take more land in the name of wildlife sanctuary. And there are and the questions they're asking is, all this wildlife sanctuary is good, but what are we getting out of it? And within the community, there are multiple voices. Some people will say that no, the sanctuary is good. And at that point of time, there was also discussion that the sanctuary should become a tiger reserve, because there was this rescue of tiger cubs there. And so the first question is they're questioning authority about why this wildlife sanctuary is here. So unlike maybe in other places, I don't know how much, I find in Northeast, it's much more open and much more forceful. And the other example about expertise and authority is that many people have said that tigers were always here. And why this hoo-ha about this sudden interest in tigers? Because 2012-13 was very interesting turning point in Dibang Valley, because you're talking about the second last village from the Sino-India border. And there were these 3 tiger cubs which fell into this dry tank. So NGO from Delhi, so the people came there. It's a very difficult place to also go, 12 hours. So there was a big rescue team, and then they rescued these animals. And while they were rescuing, I was told that I was not there at that point of time, but people are telling that they called the local shamans to do some ritual, because these tigers they have a kinship relation with the tigers. And they said, if you're taking them, be careful, because it's so I think that episode of, on one hand, group of veterinary scientists extracting blood and collecting the fecal material of the tigers. And one of the questions scientists had is whether they are Indian subspecies or a Chinese subspecies. So a lot of excitement in terms of science, and and then local community, there was a local shaman who did a small ritual so that the tigers are taken away and the tigers are also named after 2 villagers there, 2 residents. One is the wildlife board member, the other is the Anchal Samiti member. But something interesting happened. These tiger cubs were kept in lower Dibang district for some time, and they were being taken away to Itanagar, 900 kilometers from the site of from the zoo. And while they were taking it, when I interviewed some student leaders after many years, and in the interview, one of the student leaders said that, no, why are you taking it to Itanagar? These are our tigers, it should be here only. So this sense of claiming these animals, that these are ours. And then, but these are forest department's, animals now, because it's rescued by NGOs and kept in Itanagar. So forest department also played an important role. So rescuing of animals and people questioning, why you have to take it to Itanagar Zoo and it should be here because our children have to see them, was very interesting. And there was also this story about they should have been kept in Kaziranga, which has a state-of-the-art rehabilitation center for animals, but they were taken further away to Itanagar. And then, and I think the story people tell me is that because Arunachal want to keep their tigers in their own state and not to give it to Assam. So I find this very interesting about how scientists are trying to find out where these tigers belong to, whether they are Chinese subspecies or Indian subspecies. And within the states, there are these claims that, where these tigers should be. So on next Monday, I'll be in Itanagar. So I will be going and seeing these 2 tigers. Out of 3 tigers, one died when they were rescued. And the story is that there were 4 tiger cubs which were roaming around in that village. 3 of them fell into the tank, 2 were rescued, and 1 died. And so out of that, 2 are in Itanagar Zoo. They must be adult now, and the other one is still is in the wild. So the fate of these tigers and the stories behind them is very interesting. How the state forest department signs, and more interestingly, what people say about tigers is very important. So the title of, I get a lot of praises for the title of my book, but I think the credit goes to people, because this is what they said when I didn't want to work on tigers at all. I went to Dibang Valley to understand politics of conservation and how different groups of people participate in conservation, the idea of participating and not participating. But when I went there, the moment they had people thought that, and when I asked stories about the tiger rescue, so that has become like a, what is it called, the mythology of Dibang Valley tiger rescue operation and all that. So then people would say that, tiger and humans are bye-bye. And there is a story they will tell me again and again, again and again. So at that point of time, I thought, if at all I write a book, I had decided that this will be the title, and it's not mine at all. This is people's, and the other parts of Arunachal and Northeast also have very similar kinship relations with tigers. And the story is that because they belong, it's our elder brother. Killing a tiger is like killing a sibling, and it's a very serious crime to do. So from the indigenous conservation, if you can call it like a tiger conservation perspective, so this is helping tigers, and so I thought I will bring that. And people question the state when the state was interested to declare this sanctuary as a tiger reserve. They said, we don't kill these tigers, but why do you need a tiger reserve here? So I think it was using their indigenous knowledge to question the state was it frequently happened. And that's because many scientists who came there, unless you stay with them and understand, there were stories that people told me that when scientists would completely disregard, this is 2006, around that time, I was told that when people would come to survey monkeys and survey butterflies, and people would say that there are tigers, and I think there was a scientist who said, "Bilkul nahi hai. There is no way there will be tigers here because it's very high. The altitude is very high, and prey population is very less." So often people's knowledge is discarded, and people get very upset with that. And there people know that your knowledge, that their knowledge is very superior, it's very clear, and they said yours is a bookish knowledge. So that's true, actually.
I wanted to ask you about kinship, because that's a very anthropological framing of this question, and but at the same time, I guess people from animal rights perspectives, or people who are arguing for such a perspective, would say that the difficulty with kinship is that animals seem to be in fixed positions in such relationships, and that, say, even if the tigers are not killed, some other animals will be hunted, and they would be in fixed positions in a hierarchy of sorts of the animal world. But at the same time, I do feel that that's misunderstanding what kinship is about, because the word means such different things in American anthropology. So could you talk a bit more about what exactly this kinship is?
No, thank you so much. That's an interesting question. I'll tell you what people told me, and then maybe if I don't know whether I can answer that, but I'll tell you what. So relationship with animals, it's very, very, very diverse and multifaceted. Kinship is one, and that, again, in many indigenous cosmology, there is the notion of fixed relationship or fixed position. It can be challenged. Because on one hand, tigers are so it's not about worshipping. It's considering that the human world also encompasses other non-human species. So it could be tigers, it could be animals, it could be also mountains and spirits. So if you look at, in one of my, there is one, if you look at three different worlds, all of them overlap. Whether it's human world, the animal world, and the spirit world. Because the belief is that these animals they don't belong to us. So even though it is even though tigers are seen as a kin, these tigers are someone else's property. Someone also who is the owner of these animals are these animal spirits who occupy various sections of the landscape. So if you look at Mishmi landscape, if I can call that, if you look at the landscape or the social world of the residents of the Dibang Valley, these forests and mountains are not empty. There are animals and there are spirits at different landscape. So for example, there are a lot of stories about water spirits, which can these water spirits live in the rivers, and something bad may happen, and deaths because of drowning is attributed to the water spirit. And there are these mountain spirits called golong, which is feared by the hunters, because when they go to the forest, to the mountains to hunt, they are negotiating not with the forest department here. It's not about shall we go and hunt, but taking permissions from the spirits. So there are a lot of interesting taboos which are still following. And people also say that, in Hindi they say, hum jahan tahan nahi marte, which means that we don't hunt here everywhere. We don't hunt here and there. And overhunting is seen as, so if you don't follow these rules and regulations, you are annoying the spirits, because this landscape doesn't belong to us. So I like this, it's not liking. It's very interesting to see how landscape animals are not seen as theirs, even though it's their kin. So not killing tigers is still followed. But what happens, these tigers become problematic. Problematic means, that's what I'm saying, it's not fixed. Problematic means there are, when the tigers get very hungry and there is no prey in the forest, they actually visit the villages to lift cattle or hunt, kill the cattle. And people have huge problems with carnivores, large carnivores, and also wild dogs attacking cattle. And in this part of the landscape, there is a very unique cattle called Mithun, which is a semi-domesticated cattle. And these cattle are never kept at home like cow or buffaloes. They are free-ranging animals, and they are brought back when it is needed for slaughtering. So, and these cattle is not used for milching. So these are very expensive cattle, 50,000, 60,000. And there are incidents where wild animals, wild carnivores would come and attack them at that point of time. So people say that, yes, we don't hunt tigers, we don't kill tigers, they're our brothers. But under two circumstances, we harm them, we kill them, when it becomes dangerous for human lives and it becomes dangerous for the property of the humans. So cattle, when it's attacks, sometimes there are people would actually, and then accidental traps also. Sometimes tigers get killed in the traps accidentally. So there are incidents of that. So at that point of time, the role of shamans become very important. The role of shamans is to go and inform shamans. And the story is that killing tigers is the biggest crime Idu Mishmi can do. And it's important to inform the shaman, and the shaman, will follow certain rituals to, rectify that. But still, very, very rarely retaliatory killing has happened. But what in my book, when I argued, which some of the Idu Mishmi got a little offended, is when I said that, because these are very remote places, there is no active market connectivity now. Connectivity is there, but there is trade for musketeer pods. But I've been saying that once a market is connected, but now there are roads are coming up, and then there may be, what if there is a market for tiger parts? What will happen at that point of time? Or when your brother becomes problematic, wouldn't you harm them? So I have written that, and people have said, no, you shouldn't have written that. So I think this is what I'm arguing, that there is no fixed position. Societies change. There is, rituals change. Some of the taboos are eroding because of Christianity. Many of them don't follow taboos, but hunting is continuing. So I've written about this in other papers, that there's nothing like fixed position, and this is changing. Of course, if you look at the stories, these stories are very, very important, and because these are oral histories, right? So if I hear this story from 5 people, all 5 of them will share this with me in a different way. So the story that I have said, if I'm writing it as a children's story, I would change it, but overall the framework remains the same. This is true for other communities also. Wherever there are oral histories, unwritten, there is no script for Idu Mishmi. Now they are preparing dictionaries and languages, formalizing languages. But oral history stories change, and some stories are actually in very bits and pieces. And when I talk to people, they say this is how it is, because it is unwritten. There are some lot of gaps. So at least in addition to that, there are plenty of animal stories, and so I'm also documenting that. So the question is, even though these animals are called as kin, they don't claim them as their property. I think that becomes very important from a modern conservation perspective, where from science says that it's easy, you count animals and start managing. Wildlife management is itself, it's about managing. But I've been arguing that can we not use some of this conservation ethos, and instead of bringing policies from top-down approach, is it not better to sit with people and say, use that as, acknowledging that this is, people's relationship with nature is also is important. And my interest is to bring those relationship up, and in the public domain. Otherwise, these are oral histories which will go away. All the stories will be gone, and we will be at a loss, I feel. And then there are so role of communities now is becoming more important. That's why Forest Department is reaching out to them, not because they really care about people or care about their stories, but I think this is now seen as politically correct thing to do, reaching out to people. And let's see. Yeah, Manu,
I think Anu has a question. Yeah, and then maybe Professor Rukmini, because I can see she's unmuted.
Okay. I was just a little bit confused, but I think while waiting for my turn, I've sort of figured it out, but I still run it past you once. So you mentioned the 4 cubs, out of which 2 survived and ended up in the zoo, and 1 that died in the well, and the 4th one that's supposedly roaming around the village still.
yes.
And I believe their mother was killed by someone because exactly she was like this problem tiger who was killing cattle in the village instead of staying in the jungle. So that's why she was killed. Do you know what happened to the young man who killed her? Like, was there some kind of a process of after going to the shaman, or is this something that you only do if you kill a tiger that is a non-problematic tiger? And then secondly, I was wondering why such resistance to the cubs coming back there. I mean, being out in the wild and then sleeping, I figured out, yes, of course, because they are cubs, they would not be able to hunt and fend for themselves in the forest. So the chances would be that they keep coming back to the village to get poultry, and that would then become a problem for the villagers, right?
Yes. No, thank you for, yeah. No, thank you for bringing that. I interviewed the person who in whose trap the mother tiger was killed, and the processes followed. And I think there was there is a ritual called tamamra, which is conducted to sort of what to say, to get rid of the curse of the tiger. And but during my study, his entire house was accidentally burnt. It's a long house. I have a nice video of that, and I interviewed him, and I took the video. In my subsequent trip, I went to meet him, and he said, the entire house was burnt. And do you have those pictures of my house? Because he has animal skulls and everything. So I shared my pictures with him. But people say that because so many untoward incidences, whether human death, illness, madness, suicide, burning of the house accidentally, is attributed to killing the tiger, or not following the taboos of during hunting or when the meat was brought home. So again, relationship with animals are very are reflected in their lives in very multiple ways. So many people say that the house that was completely gone is because even though you do a ritual to cleanse your sin, something very bad will happen. And so there are many stories that I've documented where people, if there is a suicide, people will say that he went out hunting, and then he shouldn't have brought this meat back home. And so the one example is that if you bring back wild meat at home, so there is a separate space. So it should not be cooked inside the home kitchen. So there is a small extension outside. So all the wild cooked outside. And in this community, wild meat is only consumed by men. And there is a separation of gender. And if your hunting is successful, then there are a list of taboos that they follow. Food restriction of garlic, mushroom, not sleeping with women for the next 5 days, not taking bath, or so there is separation of space, separation of time, separation of gender. So that aspect is very important, very important, and it's followed very strictly there. And the senior people say that the younger people are not following because they got converted into Christians, or people have become very modern. So often the discussion is around how you treat any visits to jungle or forest and coming back with meat. It comes in very interesting ways, and people often attribute any wrong any untoward happening in their family to how you treat not only just animals, also animal meat. And your next question was about I'm forgetting. Yeah, when the cubs. So the cubs, when they were captured, they were kept in Rowing Zoo for some time, which is in the lower Dibang Valley. The one possibility was to release these cubs back into the wild, where their original home is, right? At that point of time, people were resisting. Don't bring them. So again, the picture is so complex that one cannot tell a neat story here. On one hand, they wanted to not let these scientists take the cubs away because they thought that on the way it will die or anything. And when the scientists were planning to bring them back, there were also cages, very broad cages of slow release of these cubs. And people said, don't bring them back because they start growing very fast and they'll come back and pick up our chicken and other animals. So that resistance was because of also the fear. And also often they're upset with the forest department. Why is forest department not helping us? We are the one who rescued the tigers, cubs. So it's also the fear that if the animals attack our cattle, they should be giving us compensation, but they are not giving us compensation. And so inactive at that point of time. Now I think because of tiger, now technically there's an announcement that it should be made into a tiger reserve. Yeah, so let's see what happens. I think the story is still continuing.
I think Professor Rukmini has a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't have time to read the paper, which I normally do, but I didn't this time, today. So I have a very simple question, like running through from when I joined, the moral order, is very important. There is an implicit moral order in thinking about animals. So when the guy, at the beginning, when this officer says, who will cull the deer, and they say, we'll take care of this. If the deer gets overpopulated, we'll take care of this. So there is taking of a moral responsibility. Now, this is I haven't read your paper, but this is very different from the traditional nature-culture divide, because you have this complex or traditional or sort of academic nature-culture divide that you get in Raymond Williams or somebody like that, where you have a very complex moral world where you have spirits, you have animals, and you have humans. So my question to you is, if we were to do a sort of trolley experiment where we removed, let's say, the spirits completely from this world, as may indeed happen with modernization, what would be your prediction about the changes in the moral order because you're removing one of the major players. Or supposing you were to remove animals from the environment completely because the humans went into the cities and there were no animals to contend with, would the sense of territory and space be so disturbed that you could no longer have the kind of moral order stories that you have been narrating throughout? I don't know whether this is a very simple question.
No, very interesting, very interesting.
Get to tragedy of the commons, but for the moment, I just wanted to know what would happen if you took away some of these worlds. Would otherwise, for example, these people who come in from outside, whoever they are, wildlife people or you or something, do they belong to a different world? Are there spirits, locals, animals, plus these strange people who come in from the outside? What world do they belong to? And what would be their moral stake in this? Because you're having different sorts of moralities contending in the narratives. So I wanted your take on this.
Yes,
It's
thank
just
you. Thank you so much. No, thank you so much. I think when you said that, what if we remove the spirits? The example that I have, I don't know whether that answers your question, is that there is some level of conversion to Christianity, where the belief is that so if we use that as a model to say that they stop believing in indigenous animistic and animism, and it has been replaced by another religion of Christianity, where there are no multiple spirit. There is one spirit, maybe, or one deity.
There are spirits, however.
Yeah, there are spirits. So I'll tell you what happened in the when it's not. I don't know whether we can completely remove the spirit world from this equation, whether we are people in Arunachal or whether we are people sitting here in our own lives. So I think spirits in some form will continue to exist, but the names may be very different. Names may be very, very different. And then, so relationship with animals and humans will be, at some level, will be maintained by the non-human, non-animal spirits. Because whatever, I think it's not about religion, it's about what you believe in. And so I'll tell you what happens in families who have converted to Christians there, and what happened to the family who have not converted to Hinduism, but they follow Hindu practices because of there's a lot presence of RSS and VHP is largely present there. So I have interviewed people who have converted to Christians, but my main question is, do you still continue to hunt? And if you're hunting, is the taboos followed? So first thing they say that they've stopped keeping the animal skulls, which is an important part of an animistic culture. The skulls are not displayed because first thing they do is to throw away all the skulls and burn it. So in their house there will be no skulls, but there is something very interesting in the so every Mishmi house will have this long houses display of animal skulls. But there's a separation between the domestic animals and the spirit, wild animals. And in between the separation, there is a wooden pole, which is it's called Amuni, because this is where the spirits reside, the house spirits reside. So people who have converted to Christianity, there will be no skulls, but this Amuni is still there. So I think that's what I'm saying. Spirit world, I don't know whether we can have that equation where the spirit world is completely out, because they appear in some form of the other. And we're talking about first generation Christians, barely second generation. So I think when it comes to relationship with this theme that thematic picture I'm drawing about human world and animal world and spirit world will, this is what I would argue, it will continue to stay. And how people look at those from Delhi and Gandhinagar, that's an interesting question, and I don't know. So you're asking whether we fit into that thematic
Yeah, it's
picture.
a moral theme, right? So where do
Mm-hmm.
people fit in? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
if there is a war of worlds in some ways, then you would expect, I mean, if you were to universalize your proposition, moving it from the Mishmi to the human, which Freud talked about in Totem and Taboo, moving it to a universal hypothesis that we always need a spirit world. I mean, whether you are atheist or whatever you are, you require that spirit world, because the psychology, the human psychology, maybe animals, has a space for instinct, or has a space for something which you do without rationally working out what the law is, how you treat animals, how you impose. You may have like, you have this instinct that such and such cannot be done, and you may build it into a narrative mythology about, spirits or whatever. But even if you took that out, you would still have something like the need for intuition in human beings, and that. So I'm really asking, when you have this conflicting sort of orders, what would be the ways, apart from behavioral? Okay, you remove the skulls, but that's behavior. But beyond that, what's happening mentally, cognitively, that should be tracked through narrative, through story. So, what's your prediction about these outsiders or whatever, or changes that change the way in which you regard the world around you, or not?
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you so much. I think it's making me think about who are the other outsiders here. Maybe if we can bring in more, other than the conservation biologist, what is happening now is the tourists are coming in. I think the last 10 years, the economy has changed from, I think the tourism economy, because of the roads is coming. And these tourists are actually trekking up to this high altitude wetlands, which are home to many spirits. And the so when so the spaces are actually now multiple spaces, as you said. There are the spirits world, which people are feeling that the tourists are disturbing, and sometimes they're asked to be careful when they're going there, because these are home to high altitude spirits. I've actually finished writing a paper about this high altitude lakes, and what does it mean to Idu Mishmi, and then these are pictures. If you look at these pictures, some of them look like Switzerland. And the people the groups who are promoting this tourism are the local boys, actually. So I think what may happen is some members of the community are worried that too much of disturbance in this place. Sometimes it seems people would actually ask for loudspeakers to do dance up there, and the local villagers are concerned that this should not happen. And the people who this time I interviewed some of the young boys who are setting up these trekking companies. Many of them are also set up, and they said we are very careful, and we will not allow tourists to do XYZ because it is disturbing the spirit world. I think what we are seeing is not only overlap but friction between these. So between the commercial world that is knocking their doors, but and also wanting to preserve their own landscape. So I'm not sure now about the moral order you're talking about, but this may change, because tomorrow, if the commercial, I'm predicting that this will be the second Shimla of Northeast India. This is people have unexplored areas and high altitude trekking routes, and this is the new Shimla that will happen, and it will end up becoming like Shimla. Unless we put unless communities themselves think about regulating tourism. Similarly, when the conservation point of view is that the friction is that people are asking this question about why you need to have this big sanctuary to protect wildlife? Why don't you give us some land? So it's a friction is about land usage, and often using their cosmological angle, they are questioning this modern conservation. And but there are also groups who want to participate with conservation because they think that this is a better way to participate. This is how the world is. Look at sometimes they give examples from Kaziranga, saying that if it becomes like Kaziranga, we will get employment, we will get our economy will be better because there are no other industries. So I think the moral order will be. I hope that communities have a say in whatever is happening there. But in Northeast, something interesting is happening, that communities are taking a call about what should be, what kind of, so I'm not saying that, not everybody will, so people are waiting for investments to come, big investments to come and change so I don't know what will happen to the spirit world. I can't say beyond this. I don't know if you, I don't know, but thank you so much for your question.
We are past time, but I can see in the chat that there's one more question. Are you okay with taking one last question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
No, if we're short of time, it's all right. I'm good to go. Don't worry. Don't want
No,
to.
please. Yeah. No, please ask. Yeah.
No, actually, it's just a bit of kind of possibly what I'm trying to understand from your talk. Is it that we really need to, in a sense, tune ourselves to the kind of shifting and almost transformative everyday life? And in that sense, when you are referring to this kind of what seems like to the indigenous, the idea of nostalgia in terms of the everyday discourse, which in a sense is not expressible, but in some senses is because there is a concern of the community of kind of dismissing life that is that becomes and you really see it against the context of the rights of personhood. You see it as what does it really what is this whole idea of this creaturely, this idea of the wild, the idea of the shamanic, almost what is seen as a soulful sort of animality of being there. And is there a description of this in the narrative structure that you have you're trying to bring forth in terms of conservation now, in terms of, is it also a matter of self-preservation for the community? Is it more than is there something which is there's something more that haunts this whole discourse, and what does it really speak about, possibly the way they're referring to and I do understand that in terms of literally the terrain, the terrain itself takes you into a different world altogether, and the way you can put the relationship of the other creature and the way a very different world can unfold in a very ritual, dramatic, almost very dramatic kind of way. Is it really a response to the self, or is it really a response to the animal there? What does it really bring out?
No, so one thing people say, even I've observed, which is not there in other parts of Arunachal, is the role of shamanism have decreased. There are, if you look at other communities, other animistic groups, and people often say that there's a lot of pressure on the community also to change. I think I'm talking about the politics of religion here, or politics of belief systems here. And Idu Mishmi will be one of the last districts in Arunachal, I feel, where there are shamans still, very active they're very much part of the everyday life of Idu Mishmi. In other places, people say that because of Christianity and other religions, things have changed. So I think people also, I don't know whether it is because of landscape or not, but changes came much later to this district compared to other places. So if you're asking me that, are the life in I don't know whether I'm answering it, whether I'm clearly answering to what you're asking. Is that I don't know about the landscape, whether the landscape is such that people are, look at animals differently, but I can say that the society is at a cusp where, let me tell you, the first road, the proper roads is getting constructed now. There was only one road. So I think we are looking at a place which was cut off for a long period of time. Anini for many months was seen as a punishment posting. A place which took 14 days trek from Rowing to Anini is now, we can reach there in 6 hours. So I think, and this change is very, very fast. The society itself is going through a very, a transition phase. And the example I can give you is that while they're rooted in indigenous practices, shamanism, the modern world is also there very quick. I was told about an example of a man who was admitted in the hospital. And then he asked the shaman to come to the hospital. So the shaman was chanting, and there was a drip, glucose or whatever was administered in the hospital. So this is this is a picture of a state where these two worlds are, and people want to preserve. They take really good pride in saying that in other places shamanism have gone down, because also in the name of because of Christianity and Hinduism, people so in Idu Mishmi, there are people who are converted into Christians. There are people who are still follow animism, but also some of them also started to practice Hindu ritualistic practices. And so the belief system is one example, but you can see this in many other sectors. There are English medium schools, but there are also schools that are set up by Idu Mishmi educated members to teach their children the local language. So there are dictionaries. First time there are dictionaries that are coming up, alphabet books that are coming up, and then there is this internet and YouTube videos, and there's a YouTube channel called Dibang Valley, and there are music albums that young people are uploading. So we are witnessing a world where many things are happening. So I don't know whether I have, I don't know where. Bharti, I don't know what I'm saying, but but I don't know whether.
It's a very fascinating terrain, and in fact, I know of one sociologist who did her work there many years ago, from Delhi University, perhaps. But I've continually thought this is so interesting because my own work, some of it used to be for a long period of time in Ladakh. And I do know that, of course, in terms of terrain, very different, but the sheer isolation and the sheer lack of the state, which can actually give a very different sense of both identity and discourse to a place, immediately, it's like splitting between worlds of nothingness actually the whole idea of the mystery of an animal, like does the animal, how would an animal matter to me? Why does why does one particular animal start mattering? Like say in Kerala, why does an elephant become such a symbol? Why does a particular, what is it that it unfolds to us? Because it's not, is it just the animal? There's something more. And of course, I'm speaking from a position of ignorance, I myself. It's just that it is something which is very fascinating, and which you're sharing with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Just one more example that came to my mind when we were talking about the school system. There's a new school for shamans. The young boys are being trained as shamans because the number of shamans are decreasing. So and people are, the anxiety is that if the shamans are lost, we'll lose our identity because of the oral narratives and the rich narratives that shamans. So there's a biologist who did PhD there, an anthropologist who has set up this school, where and there's a scholarship for young Mishmi boys to become a shaman. So that is again, when I say this, the syncretism of multiple layers, and all domains are meeting each other. So I don't know what is going to happen. But this question of uniqueness, why animals matter a lot, it's a very interesting question, because many of the animals are people say that all these animals were with us before, and then some of them went into the forest. So I think this thing about separating animals going away to the jungle from the human world is also interesting. That's why I think whether it is, so you take pigs, cattle, other animals. So there is one domestic form of that and there is one wild form of that. And then often the story is that we were together and then something happened, and then those who went into the forest became. One interesting story about claiming these animals. So there's a story that both the people and the mountain god, the mountain spirit, claimed that the takin, the mountain goat, belongs to. The fight was that people said that they belong to us, and the mountain spirit said that this belongs to the mountain spirits. So they decided to have a tug of war. So the mountain spirit held the horns of the animal, and the people had this held the tail of the animal. So there were tug of war, and and then during that time, the mountain spirit so powerful that when he pulled the horns became twisted, and people lost with just a tail. So the animal has a small tail and this huge twisted horn, and the mountain spirits claimed that the animals. So they say, and they took these animals to along with the spirits to the forest. So this story is about claiming these animals, and and then that they were our animals, and now they're safely there. So I don't know whether I feel that the living with animals, as you said, it could be just not only Idu Mishmis, all over the other indigenous groups, closeness to animals, and in their mythology, but also as living with animals, consuming them is all part of the living social world of many indigenous groups. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. That was really beautiful. And thanks to everyone for being here and for spending time with us. I hope, Dr. Ambika, that you have a great time with your field work when you get there next Monday.
Thank you.
Everyone, and have a good evening. Bye.
Bye.